First thing is a sound check, just to make sure that everybody on the line can hear us just fine. So if you go to your little webinar window and the little raise your hand button and click on that, that will let us know that you can hear us and all the sound checks are working. We see some hands start to go up, so yay, wonderful, it's working. As we go through the webinar today, if you run into technical difficulties or if you want to fire a question at us, underneath where you click on the little thing to raise your hand, you can click on the window that says questions and type that in there, and I have support crew here with me who's going to keep track of the questions that come in, and we'll interrupt as we go along if we need to answer your questions. If questions aren't pressing and aren't going to stop the flow of the webinar, what we'll do is run this more as a broadcast webinar where I'll give you the information and run through everything. And then at the very end, we'll held some time for some questions and answers. So we'll take that time at the end to run through everything. So once again, welcome to our 2013 Mining HR Outlook webinar. This is the second one that we run in a series of 4 that we're doing over the next 2 weeks. And this year we've organized the webinars by time zone. So each webinar we're presenting the national outlook for 2013, followed by a short discussion of the issues and some of the forecasting and LMI activities that we have going on in your area. So you'll see a little bit of information on your local time zone and what we have going on come in throughout the webinar. And what I'll do is, if the case is that we've done some work in your local area and we can inject a little bit of information that might be a little bit different from what we see in the national forecast that I'm presenting, I'll let you know where some of those differences come up. But for the most part, this discussion is going to be overall looking at the national outlook for 2013. So once again, after the presentation is over, we'll take time to answer a few questions that you may have. Please feel free to ask those as we go along in the question box, and we'll keep track of them and compile them for the end. New in this year's forecast, for those of you who have been to our webinars before or know our material well, we have some new features that you'll see as we go throughout. One of the features this year is that the national forecast truly is just taking a look at the national picture. In the past, we've divided the forecast into different regional level analysis, and what we're doing instead now is creating full forecasting reports for the different regional areas. So this one is going to focus on the national outlook. We also new this year have provided an industry sector breakdown for our hiring requirements forecast, along with the occupational level breakdowns that you'd be familiar with. And we've also added a whole new section to our forecasting capability called Forecasts of Available Talent. These are meant to complement our hiring requirement forecast and give an opportunity for us to do a side-by-side comparison of the needs and who we're going to be, who we forecast will be available over the next few years. So before we get started on the forecasting and the numbers, I'll tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do. MIR, the Mining Industry HR Council, is the national HR council for the minerals and metal sector. We're a research hub and a catalyst for solving the HR issues in Canadian mining and mineral exploration. We act as a catalyst and leader in bringing the right stakeholders together to discuss the issues and find proactive solutions and implement programs that will ensure that the industry's long-term competitiveness and success is in place. The way we do that is under 3 different programming banners. The first, Attraction, Retention, and Transition, the blue one there on your left, focuses on programs that attract the future workforce through promoting mining as a career of choice, and also focus on programs that build diversity and inclusion in the workforce. We've done a number of research reports with groups like Women in Mining Canada to understand diversity in the industry. Importantly, in this area of programming is work that encourages Aboriginal participation in the industry. In particular, we have a program that supports workplace readiness training for Aboriginal people called Mining Essentials. So if you're interested in any of the programs that I'm talking about, do feel free to pop us an email after the webinar, and we'd be happy to put you in touch with the folks who can tell you more. Under Skills, Learning, and Mobility, programming area offers activities that ensure that the systems for an appropriately skilled and effective and mobile workforce are in place. The flagship program under this priority area maintains an industry-led worker certification program that's based on national occupational standards. It's built by industry for industry and currently certifies workers in 4 previously undesignated occupations: underground miner, surface miner, mineral process operator, and diamond drillers and drill helpers. And last count I heard, we had surpassed 625 certified mining workers in Canada, and we're working hard towards our goal of having 1,000 certified by the end of this calendar year. So it's very exciting. The program's picking up a lot of good energy and pace right now. The third area of programming is the one that brings us together today on this webinar, and that's our research for industry sustainability area. Under this programming area, we provide information, intelligence, and insight on Canada's mining labor market. We do provide HR policy information and also workforce planning tools and resources. So a collection of research programming to help address the HR issues and to provide a foundation of understanding of the numbers and the trends in the Canadian mining labor market. We are an industry-led organization, and we collaborate with a wide spectrum of stakeholders, including employers, education institutions, organized labor, Aboriginal communities, and a number of other industry associations and groups. So perhaps you've worked with some of those groups and you know us from some of the things that we do. Here at MIR, we define the mining industry. So whenever I say mining industry through the whole webinar, I mean the full spectrum or the full scope of the mining cycle, starting from prospecting and exploration activities through advanced development and construction, right to extraction, and also including some initial mineral processing. We also do some forecasting around support services and contractors for mining and mineral exploration activities, and even include some forecasting and analysis around closure, care, and maintenance, and environmental assessments in the industry. We have a slightly different way of defining the industry than you may see in other organizations. So when I go throughout the presentation, I'll give you the context of how many people we're talking about when we talk about the mining industry. As you're probably very familiar, mining activities occur all over Canada with many projects located in northern and remote locations. This becomes a very important thing to keep in mind when we talk about the mining workforce and Aboriginal engagement in the mining workforce, which I'm going to show you some demographics on in just a few minutes. As you can see here, what we're showing you here is the commodity mix varies greatly by province and territory across Canada. And so too does the nature and mix of the mining activities in those different regions, and that also impacts the workforce profile and the workforce needs in those areas. I'm showing you this to give you a sense of the different types of contexts that you might see in the industry across the country, and to highlight for you that when we're going through the forecast numbers that I'm showing you, I'm talking about all of this rolled together, so the full national picture. Some of your local area context may get a bit diluted when you're looking at the numbers, and some of the numbers may not make sense when you're thinking about your own individual situation, and that can be very true. We've begun extensive work over the last several years to look at forecasting labor market needs in the various provinces and territories and even sub-provincial regions across the country to give us a sense of what that regional level context means in terms of the mining labor market. So currently we have 9 regional analysis reports that are available for download on our website. We have a report for Saskatchewan that we produced in 2011, and in 2012 we produced a report for the Yukon and a report for British Columbia, along with 6 regional sub-provincial level reports in Northern Ontario. All of these, as I said, are available for download on our website. If you're having trouble finding them, just shoot me an email and I'll be happy to point you in the right direction. We're also currently engaged in regional analysis in the Northwest Territories and Nunavut. We expect those reports to be available sometime in 2014, and we'll complement the one that we produced for the Yukon in 2012. And also on deck for 2014, we're hoping to do an an update of the Saskatchewan forecast that we have for 2011. So over the past 3 years, some things have changed in the industry, and we'll go in and take a look at what things will look like moving forward over the next 10 years. So throughout the webinar today, what I'll do is inject a little bit of insight from the Saskatchewan report that we did in 2011 with the caveat that things have changed a little bit, and we're looking to do that update sometime in 2014. As I noted earlier, employment in 2012 in the mining industry is just over 235,000 workers. So what we're looking at here is the orange line in the top of the graph in front of you. That's showing the whole workforce together. We're also showing you in this figure trends in employment in each of the industry's main subsectors over the last decade or so. So this goes from about 2000 to 2012. As you can see, the red line, mineral processing employment, has been decreasing steadily over time over the last decade. This is very much in conjunction with activity that we've seen going on in the mineral processing side of the industry with some offshoring of mineral processing activities. The light blue line, just underneath the red one, shows the extraction side of the sector, or the mining industry. And in the mining industry, we've seen employment has been relatively stable over time, maybe with a slight increase towards the end of 2012. And finally, you can see in the dark blue line and the green line on the bottom of the graph, exploration and support services employment has been steadily increasing over the last 10 years. That's very much related to activities that we've seen ramp up over the last 10 years in the exploration industry. I'm sure it will come as no surprise for you to hear that there is a strong correlation between economic conditions and employment in the mining industry. So what we've plotted here is a graph showing you change in GDP in mining against change in employment. As you can see, there's two patterns to notice here. One is the tight connection between that orange and blue line, strong correlation. What it means is that when times get tough, mining employment tends to drop, and then when things recover, mining employment tends to recover with it. So a change in economic conditions translates to a change in employment in the industry. The other thing that you notice here in the graph is the volatility in the industry, that employment tends to rise and fall frequently over the space of the 20 or 30 years that we have plotted here. This relationship between economic conditions and employment in the industry is very important to the exercise that we use in predicting future employment in the industry. So we take a look at a number of different economic indicators and piece together from forecasts that other people have done what economic conditions are expected to look like over the next 10 years. And we use those patterns to help us predict what future employment will look like in the industry over the next 10 years. One of the many economic indicators that we use in our forecasting is commodity prices. So what I'm showing you here are commodity prices for gold and silver. These are World Bank forecasts that are one of many forecasts we pull in to take a look at when we're looking at what's going to happen over the next 10 years in terms of commodity prices. So shown here are just the World Bank forecast for gold and silver. What I want to highlight for you is that you can see here that the commodity forecasts from the World Bank are predicting that we'll have a bit of a correction in commodity prices over time. So commodity prices are expected to fall and continue to fall from about 2012 to 2014, 2015, with slow and steady recovery of commodity prices from 2016 onwards. I'm underscoring this right now because it's important to know that in our baseline scenario that I'm about to show you in our forecasting activities, we've already accounted for today's current economic climate. It was already accounted for in a number of the forecasts that are being produced about economic conditions. So we encourage you to think long-term when you think about the numbers that are being presented to you today, and to have some assurance that current economic climate and conditions have already been factored into the 10-year outlooks that we're presenting. In our forecast, we also take a close look at key demographic trends in the labor market. So as you can see here, probably one of the most important demographic trends facing the mining industry right now is an aging workforce. So you can see in the dark blue, we have the age profile of the Canadian labor force, and that's showing you that the Canadian labor market in general is aging. There's more folks in the 45 to 65-year-old category than in the younger categories. What you can see in the yellow or orange is that the mining industry is even more aging than the Canadian labor market. Layer onto that the mining industry also tends to retire a few years younger. So rather than 62 to 65 years old, which you see in the rate in the Canadian labor market, the rest of the Canadian labor market, the mining industry tend to be retiring about 59 years old. So this creates what we call a perfect storm of conditions for aging in the mining workforce. Not only is our workforce aging more rapidly than what we see in the Canadian labor market, we're also facing losses of workers over the next 10 years to retirement as they're retiring a bit younger. Another element of the demographics of the workforce that we do reporting on is the diversity profile of the industry. So as you can see in the 3 bars to the left, mining is a main employer of Aboriginal people. We outperform the Canadian labor market in this sense. So that's the comparison of the orange bar in the middle to the blue bar on the left. When you look at the light blue bar, which is our performance against other resources sectors, we're also outperforming our peers in terms of engagement of Aboriginal people in the industry. However, when we look more closely at this trend and take a closer look at where Aboriginal people are employed in the industry, we tend to see them mainly participating in entry-level positions and production-level positions. So while we do know that we engage well with Aboriginal communities and we're outperforming the Canadian labor market in terms of the proportion of Aboriginal people employed in the industry, there's still a lot of work to be done in the industry in encouraging Aboriginal participation in education and training that prepares them for other roles in the industry beyond entry level and production roles. If we turn our attention to the middle column where we plotted the participation of immigrants in our industry, and to the right where we've plotted the participation of women, you can see that the mining industry underperforms the rest of the Canadian labor market in terms of engagement with Aboriginal or with women and immigrants. The other comparison that we make here, as I said, is with other resources sectors. So this is our sense of how we're performing in relation to our peers. And again, you can see that we underperform our peers in engagement of women and immigrants in the industry. This is a key trend to keep in mind. It's pointing us in a direction when we talk about the gaps and the needs in the hiring requirements over the future. Pointing us in a direction for where we have work that we could do to encourage entry of women and immigrants into the labor market. They're going to be a key source of talent for the mining industry moving forward over the next 10 years to help us meet our future needs. There are 3 main components to MERS forecasting. We have hiring requirements that take a look at the need to hire people over the next 10 years. And we have available talent forecasts, which predict how many people will be available to fill the needs. So in a pure economic model, you'll hear people throw around words like demand and supply. And what we're doing here is not truly pure demand and supply analysis. We've translated everything into meaningful information for industry employers so that you understand how many people you're going to need to hire and who's going to be available to come into those positions. We then do a comparison of hiring requirements and available talent side by side for each of the occupations that we track, and we show you a gap analysis that shows you the occupational trends and where the greatest needs are going to be and helps think about what some of the solutions should look like. So first, in our look at things, we're going to take a look at the hiring requirements. MERS hiring requirements forecasts roll together both change in employment that we see from economic conditions in the industry, so that would be the net number of job growth or shrinkage in the industry over the next 10 years, along with replacement requirements. So these are the vacancies that are going to be left due to retirement or other kinds of separations from the industry. We roll those all together into a cumulative hiring requirement, so that you have a sense of how many bodies you need to replace, or to how many positions you'll need to fill over the next little while. Mere forecasts of hiring requirements also have 3 different scenarios. As I said earlier, the baseline scenario assumes a status quo of known economic conditions and predictions over the next 10 years. It follows the current economic trends and gives us a sense of what's going to happen based on the current status quo in the industry. In our contractionary scenario, we assume a grim economic outlook, and in our expansionary scenario, we assume a better than predicted economic outlook. So focus your attention on the white line in the middle of your chart in front of you. This is your baseline scenario, and as you can see, we're projecting a net change in employment that's positive over the next 10 years, and hiring requirements that far exceed the net change in employment. So your replacement requirements due to retirements and non-retirement separations are going to be the bulk of your hiring over the next 10 years. The number under the cumulative hiring requirements shows that overall, across Canada, the industry will be looking to hire over 145, almost 146,000 people over the next 10 years. Keep in mind that the way that we've counted the number of people employed in the industry, that our base level employment in 2012 was 235,000 people. So it's even in a contractionary scenario, which is the number right above the 145, over 116,000 people will be needed over the next 10 years. And the bulk of that will be due to this age demographics that we talked about and the need to replace folks due to retirement. That amounts to half of the current mining industry workforce, even in a contractionary scenario. So as you can see, there's a lot of work that needs to be done over the next 10 years to try to meet these needs. New this year in our forecast, we've broken down our broad hiring requirements, which we still present in the report year over year and on a 2, 5, and 10-year outlook. I just showed you the full 10-year outlook for simplicity's sake here. But under the baseline scenario, for our 10-year outlook, we break things down into the industry sectors. Reason we do this is that different trends start to emerge very quickly when we look at this, the different subsectors in isolation. So focus your attention on the top and the bottom of this chart in front of you and highlight for you that in exploration and support services, we see that net change in employment will actually be shrinking over time, over the next 10 years. We're looking at slight employment losses in the industry overall. However, we're still looking at very significant hiring requirements that have to do with the age profile of the mineral exploration support activities for mining workforces. So even though we're seeing overall reduction in the amount of employment in the industry, we're still looking at large cumulative hiring requirements that make up over half of the current workforce. And you can see in the mining and mineral processing sectors, the same trends that I was talking about just a little bit earlier. We're going to see some growth in the industry, but also some large replacement requirements that push us to needing to hire more than half of what we already have. So it's important to remind you here that these projections also do still account for current market conditions and current economic conditions that we're seeing in the industry. And that this is a 10-year outlook and that we need to keep our attention to the full 10-year picture. We further break our forecast down into occupations and occupational groupings as we've done in the past. So MERE forecast tracks 66 key occupations that have been defined by industry as essential. Not, a project won't go forward without these types of occupations being in place. There are other occupations in the industry that are not tracked under those 66, and that would be the bottom line before your total in this chart where we say all other occupations. The 66 occupations that we track account for approximately 60% of the industry's workforce. As you can see, where we've rolled things up into broad occupational categories here, so I'm not showing you all 66, just the top 6 broad occupational categories. As you can see, the largest demands in terms of numbers will be in trades and production occupations. And this makes sense if you think of the composition of the industry, that you would need the most hires over the next 10 years in your labor-intensive areas of your workforce. However, even categories where the numbers look small, so for example, let's look at professional and physical science occupations shown here. The numbers may look smaller in comparison to trades and production occupations that are highlighted above it, but this does not mean that these guys will be easy to find or that an operation could continue to exist without them. So if you're touring around the country like we do and talking to folks all throughout the industry, we commonly hear stories that it's not the hundreds or thousands of trades or production workers that they need to find that's keeping them up at night. It's actually the handful of professional geoscientists or engineers that they need that keeps them up at night, because those folks take a much longer time to educate and train and to gain the experience and knowledge in the industry that makes them fully competent in their roles. So when you're looking at the numbers in the tables, try not to think of it just in terms of sheer magnitude of the numbers as an indication of how hard it's going to be, but also think about level of experience of the individual and how specialized that skill set is. Those ones can be also very difficult to find. So the 1 or 2 professionals that you're missing in your workforce could be more difficult to replace over time than the 50 or 100 production occupations that you're trying to find. So hiring requirements gives us one side of the story. Maybe a few heart palpitations, a little sense of panic when you look at the numbers and you do the comparisons in the way that I've shown them to you. The natural next question that you have then will be, where are these workers going to come from? So it's one thing to tell me how many I'll need to hire over the next 10 years. But let's round out the story and take a look at how many are going to be available to come into these occupations over the next 10 years. So new this year, MIR has provided forecasts of available talent. These forecasts are for each of the 66 occupations and track how many new entrants will come into the labor market in each of those occupations. From places like immigration, from leaving school at all different levels, or perhaps from re-entering the labor market after a temporary leave of absence. We forecast how many people will be available in each of the occupations, and we look at the proportion of new entrants coming in, so that's that big red arrow in your chart in front of you. From there, we take a look at, for each of the occupations, historically, what proportion of those new entrants have gone into the mining industry to give us an indication of what mining's share of the future talent pool for those occupations is going to be. So we predict how many will be available across all industry sectors for each of the occupation, and then proportion out how many new entrants will come into the mining industry based on all those historic trends. So for some occupations that we track, such as cooks or financial analysts, the portion that go into the mining industry from entering the labor market and as a whole across all industry sectors tends to be quite small. It's probably not very surprising for you to learn that most of the people who train as a cook and enter the labor market as a cook go into hospitality and restaurant industries. Maybe 1 or 2% of them might come into the mining industry. Same for financial analysts. Most of them go into the banking and finance sector, whereas maybe 1 or 2% of them will be coming into the mining industry. So we track that 1 or 2% as mining share. For other occupations, such as underground miners, the majority of the folks who come into the labor market with training to be an underground miner will go into the mining industry. The portion ends up being somewhere closer to 90%. So across all 66 occupations, the portion that, of mining share of those new entrants changes, and it depends on how mining specific that occupation might be. So we take our available talent forecasts and we roll these up the same way we did with our hiring requirements forecast into predictions across broad occupational categories. So we do show in our forecasting report a breakdown for all 66 occupations, but we roll it up into a look at each of the broad occupational categories. So what this chart is showing you is how many people will be available in each occupational category over the next 10 years under a baseline scenario. These forecasts assume that current rates of entry into the labor market and current proportions for mining share will remain status quo over the next 10 years. So whatever we're doing right now to encourage folks into the industry keeps going on over the next 10 years, that we have the status quo for now. So as you can see, looking at the left-hand column there, mining share of available talent for each of the occupational categories, those numbers are smaller than the numbers I showed you a couple of slides ago for hiring requirements for each of those occupational categories. So there is a gap. The gap differs for each of the occupations, and I'll show you what those look like in just a moment. The other thing that we show you here is across the broad occupational categories, total available talent that will be available to all industry sectors, and then an indication of what portion is available for mining share of available talent. So for trades and production occupations, when they're rolled together, there's about 15 or 20 occupations that go under that category. When they're rolled together, on average, 7% of people coming into those occupations go into the mining industry. But again, keep in mind that if those occupations are highly mining specific, such as underground miners, that proportion jumps up to be closer to 90%. When those occupations are less mining specific, so for example, a heavy equipment operator or an electrician, you see that proportion tend to be smaller. The other thing that our new available talent forecast allows us to do is to take a look at labor pool pressures for each of the occupations. So in basic terms, this is just a look at whether that labor pool for that occupation is expected to grow. Are there going to be more new entrants over time than we've seen in the past? Or is it expected to shrink? We're going to see fewer new entrants coming into that occupation than what we've seen in the past. So what we've shown here in green, yellow, and red are the labor pool pressures. Is that occupation going to have more new entrants over time? So that would be the green category. So we say that's the labor pool is growing over time. In yellow, we're looking at fairly status quo, so it'll be about the same as what we've seen in the past. And in the red category, we're looking at shrinking labor pools over time, so fewer new entrants going into that occupation over the next 10 years. When you look at, so that's the first dimension that we're showing you in the colors. The other dimension that we're showing you in the fading of the colors, so going down the columns, is how mining-specific each of those occupations are. So most mining-specific occupations are near the top of your chart. The least mining-specific occupations are closer to the bottom of your chart. What we're showing you here is that in some occupations, we're expecting the labor pool to grow over time. In others, we're expecting it to shrink over time. The ones you may want to pay closer attention to are what's going on in the labor pools in the mining-specific occupations across the top. There's another trend that you may notice here if you're looking down the color columns at the type of occupations that are in each of those color categories. There's a trend here being illustrated that's actually a trend we're seeing in the Canadian labor market as a whole. Occupations in the green stripe to the left of the figure tend to be the occupations that require higher education, university educated or higher. Occupations in the middle tend to be college educated, whereas occupations to the side tend to be college certificate, diploma, and high school diploma level education as the entry-level education for those occupations. That's a trend we're seeing in the Canadian labor market as a whole. It's not unique to the mining industry. There tend to be more young people going to university-educated programs and graduating out of those programs into those career paths than there are coming out of high school and looking for entry-level work in a company. So keeping that in mind, when we look at what's going on in the mining industry, we see that in your top right corner, the dark red square, a number of the occupations that we see there, the underground service and support workers, for example, and production and development miners, not only are their labor pools shrinking, which is what this table is showing and what we learned in our available talent forecast. Fewer new entrants are going into those occupations over the next 10 years. You'll remember from our hiring requirements that I showed you just a few minutes ago that those are also the occupations where we're seeing the largest numbers in terms of our need. So we can take all of this information and wrap it together and do a side-by-side comparison of what's going on. So looking at the raw hiring requirements for each of the occupations and looking at who's going to be available for each of the occupations shows us what a gap looks like. When we layer in the labor pool pressures that I just showed you, that gives us a way of analyzing what's going on in each of the occupations. So if you have an occupation with a large gap, like underground production miners, that also has a shrinking labor pool over time, that's a different kind of gap than if you had a gap in a green or a yellow category where that labor pool is growing over time. So what we do in our gap analysis is pull all that together. So there's the simple math that compares the hiring requirement to the available talent forecast, but there's also a look at what those trends are in terms of the labor pools. So showing the national, what I'll show you here in the gap analysis are the national trends. I will highlight again that these national trends tend to dilute what you see in your regional level analysis. So when I go through the different gaps and we look at the occupations that are listed, keep in mind that those occupations may not be the occupations that will be in that type of gap in your local area. I'll do my best to highlight here from some trends that came from our 2011 reporting in Saskatchewan, just give you a flavor of your local industry as we go throughout. So in our report, we have a giant table that lists all 66 occupations and shows the needs, the gaps, and the challenge moving forward. I'm not going to show you the whole table of 66 occupations. What I've done is I've just pulled out the top 5 in the table, just as an illustration of the type of information that you can find in those tables. So first you'll see for each of the occupations we've listed the cumulative hiring requirement under a baseline scenario over the next 10 years. So we call that the need. We then list our available talent. So this is the new entrants that come into the mining industry over the next 10 years. So who's going to be available to mining. And then it's simple math to get the gap. So as you can see in these particular occupations, the gap is always a large negative number. So our need exceeds who's going to be available over time. This isn't true of all of the occupations that we track, and in some cases there's no gap, and in some cases there's a slight surplus that leaves the industry a little bit more comfortable for those occupations. Keeping in mind, too, that the available talent forecasts are assuming status quo moving forward, that nothing's changing. On the far right of this chart, we show you the challenge. So under this category, we're showing you how many are going to be available for that occupation across all industry sectors in Canada over the next 10 years. And then what proportion is mining's current traditional share of those occupations, just to give you a sense of how many we normally attract. And then for each broad occupational category, we show what's going to be mining's required share moving forward. So what proportion do we have to try to carve out from the labor market moving forward? So when we do this kind of analysis where we look at what the gaps look like, what the labor pool pressures are over time, and what the industry will need to do to meet their needs over time, and whether that labor pool is shrinking or growing, we find that 3 different types of trends emerge in the different occupations. So the first trend that emerges is a trend where the need, which is the orange square in the charts in front of you, is within what mining would traditionally be attracting from who's going to be available over the next 10 years. So that's the dark blue bar, is mining's share of new entrants over the next 10 years. The light blue above it is the rest of the labor pool, so the share to all the other industry sectors that would normally attract these folks. So in these cases, we're showing that the needs are within the share of talent that mining is expected to attract over the next 10 years. However, this doesn't mean that you get to take your foot off the gas, sit back and relax, and not worry about your geoscientists or your engineers for the next 10 years. We wouldn't advise that at all. In these cases, we caution that whatever efforts are going on in the industry right now in education and your partnerships with education, your recruiting efforts in the colleges and universities, that you keep doing that. We're assuming the status quo. So if you take your foot off the gas and reduce your efforts, then you're going to change things. And when we come and do a refresh on the forecast, a year or 2 from now, we'll start to see some of the effects of that, and this will shift around. So we say in this case, keep your focus and energy on retention and development of folks in these categories. And particularly now that message is important to bring forward. So when we're in a bit of an economic dip and times are tough and you're looking at hiring freezes or even workforce reductions, do this carefully and pay attention to who you're keeping and what level of education they require and how hard they're going to be to find moving forward. These are all things that matter in the decision process in terms of making sure that we don't lose the folks that we currently have working in the industry, so that we remain comfortable over the next 10 years in terms of our gaps for these folks. It's also interesting to highlight in the national trend that this is where we tend to see a number of our professional occupations, our geoscientists and our engineers are showing up in this type of a gap category. These are also folks who have a number of years of education, a great deal of experience in the industry, and have a broad education and background and highly transferable skill set that they can take to other industry sectors quite easily. They tend to be flight risk when times get tough. So focus and efforts on retention and development in these areas are certainly the way to go. I'll also highlight here, just for a little bit of local flavor, that in our 2011 Saskatchewan report, not a single occupation fell in this category. They were all in the other 2 categories that I'm going to show you. So if you're tuning in from Saskatchewan, you don't even get to take your foot off the gas on that one. So there's not an occupation that fell within this, this category. The other 2 categories, so here's the second of the other of the 3 categories. In this condition, we're looking at a case where you can see that that orange square, our need, is outside of the dark blue, which is mining's share, but within the light blue. So there's a healthy talent pool available in other industry sectors for those jobs. And mining's need, so the number of hires we'll need to make for that job, exceeds what we will traditionally have attracted. So just taking a look at the first column, the heavy equipment operators, our needs are well within what's going to be available for all industry sectors, but we're outside of what we would normally attract to the mining industry. For occupations in this case, and you'll notice if you look across at the titles of the different occupations that we're looking at, technologist, technician roles, some trades, and some heavy equipment operator roles falling into this category. In these cases, what the industry is facing is a need to attract workers away from other industry sectors that they might traditionally go to. So we won't attract enough heavy equipment operators who would have gone into the mining industry when they came into the labor market. We'll have to go and compete with construction and petroleum and electricity and other industry sectors for talent to fill those occupations, to fill those hiring requirements in those occupations. Trying to attract talent away from another industry sector is extremely difficult. These proportions, or the share that go into the different industry sectors, so we talk about mining share, the blue bar, those tend to be relatively stable over time. So you look back over the last 20 or 30 years in the Canadian labor market, the portion of heavy equipment operators that go into mining tends to be very stable over time. So it's quite a tall order to say that mining needs to increase its share of talent from other industry sectors by 2 or 5%. It certainly won't be something that will be a company-by-company solution. So in this case, we talk about increasing mining's share of talent in an industry-wide strategy, going as a group together as an industry to promote careers to young people and aggressively try to attract folks into the mining industry, to promote mining as a career choice for occupations that may not traditionally have thought of the mining industry as an option for themselves. And these types of campaigns will be best approached as an entire industry working together rather than one company initiatives here and there. So in this case, we talk about industry strategies working together and some kind of targeted initiative to try to attract folks away from other sectors. And something to highlight here is a little bit of your local flavor. The professional geoscientists and several engineering categories that you see on the previous slide that I just flipped back to here, where we focused on retention and development, those are actually under this category here in Saskatchewan, where we won't be attracting enough traditionally into the industry, so you'll have to make efforts to attract geoscientists away from other sectors moving forward. The final type of gap that we see over time is the one I'm showing you here. We call this the Grow the Talent Pool gap. As you can see, the orange squares are needs, or our hiring requirements over the next 10 years exceed what's available for any of the industry sectors, mining and everybody else included. So in these cases, we're talking about a need to grow an entire talent pool. There aren't going to be enough people in the Canadian labor market coming into these occupations to meet even mining's need, never mind anybody else. You'll notice here that most of the occupations in this category of gap fall under two types. One are their mining-intensive production occupations, highly mining-specific, and the ones where we saw the greatest needs in our hiring requirements in terms of sheer numbers. The other is that you'll notice there's a lot of supervisory and line management positions listed here. So it's not just highly mining-specific production occupations, but also your midline management, your supervisory, and early leadership roles to be paying attention to in this category. We need to be making efforts now to grow this talent pool over time so that you have folks to choose from moving forward. Something that I'll highlight here again to give you a little bit of local flavor is another very important occupation that fell into these categories. So two things. One was that the yellow dots, so the needs or the hiring requirements were way higher than what you see going on here. So there were large gaps in between the hiring requirements and who's going to be available both to the mining industry and available to all industries. The other thing that we'll highlight here too is that occupations like your geological and mineral technologists and technicians fell into this type of gap. There simply aren't enough in the Saskatchewan mining industry coming in that will meet the needs over time. So again, the types of occupations that fall out into these three different trends in the national picture tend to be a little bit different on a regional level. When we were doing work in forecasting in the Yukon, we found that almost all of the occupations fell into this Grow the Talent Pool category in the Yukon. There were very few that were in the other two. There were none in the first category and very few in the category where we want to increase mining share. So just as a quick recap, because I'm sure I said a mouthful there, when we're looking at addressing the 3 different kinds of gaps, we're looking at a need for a multifaceted approach. We want to work together as an industry to promote careers in mining to young people, Aboriginal people, women, and immigrants. They will be key talent groups to the future success in the industry. Coordinate and expand our initiatives to work with government, education, and training providers, industry employers, and other associations to grow the talent pool. So this category that I was just showing you, we won't address these needs just as an industry sector on our own. It needs coordinated efforts and strategies with government and education institutions, industry employees all working together, employers all working together, and other interested associations, immigrants and New Canadian and Aboriginal groups all working together to try to grow a whole talent pool. In all cases, we need to strive to make sure we have the best use of all the talent that already engaged in the industry, and that we work hard to retain the folks who are currently engaged in the industry. One of the solutions I didn't talk too much about at this point, but that is something to keep an eye on in the future, is that those large hiring requirements that are causing large gaps in different occupations in our industry are generally coming from, or mainly coming from, need to replace workers due to retirement. So if we had targeted strategies for re-engaging the retired workforce and ensuring that our mature workers are well engaged in the industry, and considering other options other than retirement over the next 10 years, that could go a long way too in addressing the issues that we're facing in the industry. So that's the story for the national picture in a nutshell, with a little bit of local flavor thrown in there. Thank you very much for joining us today, and for more information and discussion, you can refer to the first link I have there, mininghrforecast.ca. On that site, you'll find a spot where you can download the full report if you're looking to read it cover to cover and get more information than what I gave today. Or what you can do on that website is what we call, it's a living document. So we've taken the report and we've sectioned it out, and it exists on the website in different pages. So what you can do is flip through the different pages on the website and choose the portions of the report that matter to you, something you want to share forward in your own organization, or something you want to have pinned on your wall to keep you motivated or to help you think about solutions for your own context. You can do that on that website. You don't have to download the whole report to get the certain sections that you're looking for. The other element of that website that we had in the past is still there, where you can go into a forecasting tool and take a fine-grained look at the occupation that you're interested in. So you can go in and select the occupation and print out charts and figures only for that occupation or a collection of occupations that you're interested in, if you're not interested in all 66. You can also contact me anytime here at MIR, either by phone. I love the phone, so that's a good way to get a hold of me, or through research@mir.ca, where you can ask for more information, ask questions if you were shy to get one out today, or didn't have a chance to, or we didn't get to it. And also, if you have a request for customized analysis, or you want to discuss any individual consulting needs for your local area or company or group, please don't hesitate to contact me. We'd love to hear from you and chat through how we might be able to help out. So what we'll do now is take the last few minutes that we have together to open the floor and just see if there's anybody online who'd like to ask a couple of questions, or if there's anything for clarity that you wanted to do. So just take a look. So no questions came through the little typing area, and that's okay. And we also see no hands coming up, so that's all right. Shy groups are fine. So if you have questions after the webinar, and you're thinking through the information or flipping through the website, you want some clarity on something, please again, don't hesitate to give me a shout on the phone or fire an email off, and we'll be happy to answer any of the questions that you have. So once again, thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing from you and meeting you and chatting with you sometime in the very near future.